Chapter 3. Ashford Hall didn't look like a house. It looked like a claim staked 100 years before anyone currently living had earned the right to make it. Stone and ivy and a driveway longer than some city blocks I used to work, out in a stretch of Connecticut where the trees themselves seemed to have generational wealth. Elena had dressed for it like armor. A long, dark gown, monochrome and precise, her grandmother's necklace the only warmth anywhere on her. And in the low light of the car, she looked less like a woman going to see her father and more like a woman walking into a deposition she'd already decided to lose gracefully. "Rules," she said, not looking at me, adjusting an earring that didn't need adjusting. "You don't bring up money. You don't ask about the company unless my father asked first. You don't touch the good china. And there is somehow china that is worse than merely good. So watch me if you're unsure. And whatever you do, don't embarrass you in front of your father. I've read the room before, Elena. I promise I know how to sit in a chair." That got me a look. Not warm, but not the usual audit either. Something closer to "we'll see." I want to say the dinner started fine. It didn't start at all so much as it resumed, mid-scene, a performance that had clearly been running for years before I got cast in it. Richard Ashford met us at the door with a handshake that measured me the way you measure a used car you already intend to lowball, silver-haired and immaculate, even at home, in a house he apparently couldn't relax inside any more than his daughter could. "Julian," he said, my name in his mouth sounding like a line item he was still deciding whether to approve. "Richard." I matched his grip exactly, no more, no less, a skill that had kept men twice his size from underestimating me for a decade. And it worked exactly the same on a chairman of the board as it had ever worked on anyone else with something to protect. "Good of you to have me. We'll see how good by dessert," he said, and walked off. And I understood, in that one exchange, more about Elena's whole childhood than she'd told me in 8 months of files I'd read off a dead man's phone. Dinner was a production, 12-foot table, more forks than the situation called for, and a rotating cast of family and family-adjacent money drifting in and out of the conversation like extras who'd memorized just enough dialogue to be dangerous. That's where I met Marcus. He came in easy, unremarkable in the specific way that takes effort to maintain. Sandy hair, a suit that cost real money but was tailored to look like it hadn't. The kind of cousin who shakes your hand a half-second too long and calls it warmth. "So you're the fiancé," Marcus said, dropping into the seat across from me like we were old friends already. "Elena, he's better looking in person. Photographs never do anyone favors at this table, God knows." "Careful," Elena said dry. "He'll think you mean it." "I do mean it." Marcus smiled, and it was a good smile. Practiced, the kind that had clearly worked on rooms full of people who had no reason to look past it. "We don't get enough new blood at this table. Everyone's known everyone since before we could talk. Refreshing, having someone who doesn't already know where all the bodies are buried." I smiled back. Easy, matching him beat for beat. "Give it time," I said. "I learn fast." He laughed at that like it was the best joke he'd heard all week and reached for his wine. His expressions should have been nothing. A cousin, harmless texture, exactly the kind of face that disappears into a big family dinner and never gets a second thought. But I'd built a career on the half-second after a joke lands, the tell in how fast someone's eyes move on to their next target, and something about the way Marcus's gaze slid off me and settled, just for a beat, on Elena's hands folded on the table, assessing, almost proprietary, sat wrong in a way I couldn't name yet, and wasn't going to try to name out loud at a dinner table full of people I'd known for 4 hours. That sat wrong enough to stick. Same growing list as the photograph. Same list as the phone call about the confidence review. The list was getting longer than I liked. It was Richard over the second course who did the thing I'd actually been braced for since the car. "You'll forgive me for asking directly," he said in the tone of a man who'd never once in his life needed anyone's forgiveness for anything. "But the board has questions about timing. Elena's grandfather was specific about his intentions, and specificity tends to invite scrutiny. I trust you understand the position you're both in." The table went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when everyone's pretending not to listen while listening extremely hard. I watched Elena's spine go a fraction straighter, watched her open her mouth to do what she always did, absorb it, manage it alone, carry the weight without asking anyone to help her carry it. And for the first time since I'd woken up in this life, I didn't wait to see how she'd handle it. I understand the position completely, I said before she could speak. Easy, unhurried, the exact register I used to use on men who thought volume was the same thing as leverage. You're worried a stranger walked into your family with an engagement ring and a timeline, and you want to know if he's serious or if he's a liability wearing a nice suit. Fair question. I'd ask it too, if she were mine to worry about instead of yours. I let that land a beat before I finished it. She's not a line item, Richard. She's not a deadline you're managing. And I'd think a man who built this table would want better proof than a dinner conversation before he decided what kind of man is sitting across from his daughter. And since we're being direct, I added before the silence could settle, a small, easy smile creeping in, the kind I'd been saving for exactly the wrong moment my entire life. For what it's worth, she picked me, not the board, not you. I'd think a man who built this table would find that reassuring, not alarming. Good taste tends to run in families, even the ones that pretend it doesn't. Under the table, Elena's fingers found my thigh, a precise, deliberate pinch that told me, without a single change in her expression, that I had wandered several steps past the edge of the script. I did not stop smiling. I have never once in either of my lives been very good at heeding that particular warning. Nobody said anything for a second that felt considerably longer than a second. Then Richard, and I watched this happen in real time, watched something shift behind 61 years of practice control, almost smiled, not warmly, not even kindly, but like a man recalculating an asset he'd priced too low. Well, he said, and picked his fork back up like nothing had happened, which in this family I was learning was its own kind of concession. Let's see how dessert goes. Under the table, where nobody else could see it, Elena's hand found my knee again. Not romantic, more like a woman confirming a structure was still standing before she trusted her weight to it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I felt the whole shape of 8 months of managing this alone in the pressure of that one hand, and something in my chest did something I didn't have a category for yet, something that had nothing to do with the job I'd walked into this life thinking I was doing. Marcus across the table was still smiling. Still easy, still harmless. He raised his glass toward me in a small, private toast nobody else caught. To new blood, he said. I raised mine back. To knowing where the bodies are buried, I said. Give it time. He laughed again, warm and unbothered, and I smiled along with him. And underneath the table, Elena's hand stayed exactly where it was, and I added one more line to a list that was getting entirely too long for one dinner. Watch this, Marcus. He's not laughing for the reason he wants me to think he is. We didn't talk about any of it on the drive home. Not Marcus, not the fork, not the particular silence Richard had let sit after I'd finished digging myself a hole I fully intended to stand in. Elena watched Connecticut go by dark and expensive outside the window, and I let her have the quiet because I'd learned enough about her in 3 weeks to know that pushing for a reaction only ever bought you a better-built wall. You weren't supposed to say that, she said finally, still watching the window instead of me. Any of it. I know. My father almost smiled at you. Do you understand how rare that is? I've seen him almost smile maybe 4 times in my life, and one of them was at a merger. I'm flattered to rank alongside a merger. Don't be. The merger fell through. But she was still looking out the window, and I watched the corner of her mouth lose an argument it was having with itself. And for a woman who'd spent an entire dinner performing composure for a table full of people who'd known her since birth, that felt like the loudest thing she'd said to me all night. Chapter 4. The Carrington Ballroom was built for exactly one purpose, making sure everyone in it knew precisely how much everyone else was worth. Chandeliers doing arithmetic in crystal, a string quartet playing something that cost more per hour than most people's rent, and 200 guests who'd all shown up less to celebrate anything and more to watch each other perform, being unbothered by how much money was in the room. Elena walked in beside me in a silver dress that moved like water, hair swept into the low, precise bun she wore like a second spine, chin level in the specific way I was already learning to recognize as her default armor setting. And even armored, even performing, she was, I noted with some private alarm, the single most compelling thing in a room built entirely to compete for that title. I understood within about 90 seconds that this wasn't a party. This was a confidence review with better lighting. "Smile," she murmured, not moving her lips much. A hand light on my arm for the cameras drifting the room's edges. Not that smile, the one that doesn't look like you're pricing the room. I wasn't pricing the room. You were absolutely pricing the room. She wasn't wrong. Old habits. I gave her the other smile instead. Easier, warmer, the one I'd been practicing in mirrors that didn't belong to me, and felt her hand relax half a degree on my sleeve. Worth remembering that she notices more than she lets on. We did an hour of it. Board members who wanted to be seen greeting us, investors who asked pointed questions about stability with a directness that would have been rude anywhere else and was apparently just Tuesday at this altitude. I ran interference on 3 separate conversations that were trying, politely, to corner Elena into confirming a wedding date. And each time I watched something in her shoulders unknot by exactly the amount I'd absorbed for her. The 4th attempt came from a board member's wife with the subtlety of a woman who'd clearly rehearsed the question in a mirror. Something about save-the-date etiquette and whether the wedding would be a spring affair. And I watched Elena's spine do the thing it did right before she had to construct an answer out of nothing and decided on instinct not to let her. I slid an arm around her waist instead. Easy, unhurried, the exact gesture of a man who'd done it 1,000 times before, instead of never once until that second, and steered her half a step backward out of the conversation before anyone had time to notice we'd left it. "Excuse us," I said over my shoulder, already walking. "She promised me a dance before she promised anyone a date." Elena let herself be steered exactly 3 feet before she found her voice again. Low, right against my ear, where only I'd catch it. "What are you doing?" "Rescuing you. You're welcome. I didn't need rescuing." "You needed rescuing badly enough that you're currently letting me keep my arm here," I said and felt her go very still, and did not, notably, remove the arm. "This is for the room's benefit," she said, recovering fast, chin up, already rebuilding the wall in real time. "Absolutely," I agreed. "Purely tactical." I didn't move my hand. Neither did she ask me to. We didn't dance in the end. There wasn't music yet, just the low orchestral murmur of 200 people pretending not to watch us. But we stood there a beat too long anyway, close enough that I could count the individual points of light the chandeliers threw across the silver of her dress. And when she finally stepped back, it was with the particular reluctance of someone conceding a round she hadn't meant to enjoy losing. "You're good at this," she said low during a rare gap near the bar. "Suspiciously good." "I contain multitudes. We covered this." "You contain something," she said, and there was almost real warmth under the dryness of it. "I haven't worked out what yet. Take your time. I'm told I reward patience." "Is that another one of your lines?" "Only if it's working." "It's not," she said, entirely unconvincingly, and I tucked that away too, right next to the fact that she still hadn't put a full foot of space back between us, and I was still working out what to do with any of it when the room's temperature changed. I felt it before I understood why. A shift in how people were standing, a current running through the crowd toward the entrance. The specific gravitational pull of someone the whole room had decided, collectively and without discussion, was worth turning toward. I followed the pull and found him. Golden hair, an easy tan even in October, a cream tux that should have looked ridiculous next to 200 black ones, and instead looked like everyone else had gotten the memo wrong. He moved through the crowd like the crowd owed him passage, shaking hands, landing exactly the right joke on exactly the right person, and I felt something old and precise wake up in the back of my skull. A recognition that had nothing to do with this life at all. I caught the tail end of one of those jokes near the champagne table. Something self-deprecating about his own tan being the last honest thing about me, unfortunately. And the woman he'd said it to laughed for real, unguarded, the kind of laugh a room full of careful people doesn't usually spend on a stranger. Men who can make strangers laugh for free rarely need to work very hard at the rest of it. "I know you," I thought. I've never met you, and I know exactly what you are. Sebastian, Elena said, and there it was. The smallest crack in 8 months of perfect composure. A warmth in her voice I hadn't heard her use on anyone, including me. Not romantic exactly. Something older than that. Something that had calcified into a shape years before I ever showed up in this life to compete with it. He reached us and took both her hands like they were something he'd been specifically missing. Elena Ashford, still terrifying every room you walk into, I see. Sebastian Kane, she said, and I watched her. Actually watched her, the way I used to watch a room before I said anything in it. Soften at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with performance. You're supposed to be in London. I got tired of being somewhere you weren't. He said it easy, warm, like a joke that wasn't quite one, and then those warm brown eyes finally landed on me, and I got the full weight of his attention for the first time. A smile that had clearly worked on every person who'd ever met it, complete sentences, the specific charm of a man who never once had to raise his voice to be heard. And you must be the fiancé. I've heard so much. All good things, I hope, I said, easy, matching him exactly, because that's the first rule of a man like this. Never let him see that you clocked him. Mostly, he smiled wider, and it was a genuinely excellent smile, the kind that made you want to trust him before you'd finish deciding whether you should. Elena doesn't talk about her personal life much. It's how I know it matters to her when she does. I'd spent 6 years of my old life learning exactly one lesson that never once failed me. The most dangerous man in any room is the one everybody's already decided is safe. Sebastian Kane had that settled into his bones so completely, he probably didn't even think of it as a strategy anymore. It was just how he moved through the world. Warmth as camouflage, charm as a door that opened every lock without anyone noticing it was a key at all. Sebastian and I go back a long way, Elena said, and there was something almost unguarded in how she said it, an old fondness she wasn't managing the way she managed everything else. He used to sneak me out of galas exactly like this one when we were kids. Climbed out a second-floor window once. My father nearly had a heart attack. In my defense, Sebastian said, the party was unbearable, and you were 12, and somebody had to teach you that not every room worth being in has a guest list. She actually laughed, a real one, short and surprised out of her, the kind of sound I hadn't earned yet in 8 months of trying. And something in my chest did something sharp and unfamiliar that I recognized with mild horror as jealousy. Not of what he had, of what he'd had first. Years of it, banked and easy, while I was still working with 8 months of borrowed history and a body that wasn't mine. We should let you two catch up, I said, smooth, giving nothing away, because giving nothing away was the only skill I had left that still worked exactly the way it used to. I'll go be terrifying at the bar. Don't run off on my account, Sebastian said, and turned that excellent smile on me one more time, and for just a half second, so brief I'd have missed it in my old life, without 4 seconds warning built into every read I'd ever run, something moved behind it. Not warmth, an assessment, the exact flicker I used to see in men calculating whether I was worth the trouble of removing. Wouldn't dream of running, I said, matching the smile exactly, giving him nothing back but mirror. I'm very hard to get rid of. Ask anyone. He laughed at that, warm and easy, and clapped a hand on my shoulder like we were already friends, and walked off toward Elena's father with the specific confidence of a man who'd never once had a room fail to fall in love with him. Elena watched him go with an expression I couldn't fully read. Fondness, complicated, worn smooth by years I hadn't been alive for in this body. Then she caught me watching her watch him. Something in her face closed back up. Fast, practiced. He's an old friend, she said, like she was filing a report. Didn't ask, I said. You were thinking it loud enough. Must be nice, I said, mild. Being close enough to someone for that long that a whole childhood fits inside one window climbing story. I didn't get childhood friends where I'm from. I got people who owed me favors. Is that jealousy? That's an observation. Accusations cost extra. You're doing the thing again, she said, arms crossing, an audit forming behind her eyes I was getting entirely too fond of triggering. deflecting with a joke exactly when a normal person would just answer the question. What was the question? Whether it bothers you. I considered lying. Old habit, reliable, cheap. A little, I said instead, surprising myself more than her. Not because of him specifically, because you've known him 18 years and you laugh like that, and I've known you 8 months and I'm still working out which version of your laugh is the real one? That landed somewhere I hadn't expected it to land. I watched it hit, watched the audit soften half a degree into something else entirely, and for a second neither of us had anything clever left to say about it. They're all real, she said finally, quieter than before. You just haven't earned all of them yet. Maybe I was thinking it loud enough. I'd built a career on reading exactly what people weren't saying, and what I wasn't saying, standing in a ballroom that cost more than most people's lives, was this. I know men like that. I've watched men like that smile at people right before they ruined them. And somewhere behind my ribs, in a place that had nothing to do with the job I thought I'd walked into, a second, quieter thought was already forming, one I wasn't ready to say out loud to anyone, least of all myself. I don't like how she still lights up for him, and I don't like how much I noticed. Get a grip. You are a professional. This is just a job. Chapter 5, Reconnaissance. I made it exactly 4 blocks from the estate lawyer's office before Elena called to ask how bad it had been, and I decided somewhere around the second red light that the honest answer deserved better delivery than a phone call standing on a curb. On a scale of 1 to root canal, she said, root canal has better bedside manner. At least a dentist tells you when it's going to hurt. Traffic wasn't moving, since New York had apparently decided this was the week to remind me I used to drive for a living. Your grandfather's trust attorney spent 4 hours explaining, in commendable detail, that money owned by a dead man is complicated. I could have told him that for free. I did tell him that actually 40 minutes in. He didn't adjust the invoice. You billed him a joke and he still charged full rate. That does sound like Whitfield. Is that his name? I stopped listening around hour 2. You stopped listening around hour 1. I know you. There was something almost fond in how fast she said it, before she seemed to catch herself doing it and covered with, "Come home. I have actual work for you tonight." Now that's the most romantic thing you've said to me all week. It's spreadsheet work. I said what I said. She hung up laughing, short, surprised, the kind she still hadn't fully forgiven herself for giving me for free. And I drove the rest of the way home in a genuinely good mood, which is, in hindsight, exactly the kind of mood the universe likes to make an example of. I came home, the meeting had blessedly ended itself out of sheer administrative exhaustion before I did, and found Sebastian Kane on Elena's balcony, sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd been poured into the afternoon light on purpose. He'd brought coffee, not the kind Mrs. Whitmore made, the kind you'd only know to bring if you remembered from a decade ago exactly how someone took it. Julian. He stood easy, unbothered, the picture of a man with absolutely nothing to hide. Didn't think you'd be back so soon. Lawyers bored me into efficiency. I set my jacket over a chair, unhurried, giving him nothing. Didn't realize this was a scheduled visit. It wasn't. I was in the neighborhood. He said it warm, easy, the kind of lie so smooth it barely qualified as one. The specific talent of a man who'd learned a long time ago that the truth and a good enough performance of the truth cost the same amount of effort. So why not perform? Elena mentioned you had the lawyers today. I thought she could use the company. Elena, to her credit, didn't flinch under that. Just gave me a look that was equal parts don't, and this is fine, I promise. And I believe the second part more than the first. I can always use good company, she said, mild, and I made a mental note and cataloged the fact that she hadn't corrected him. Hadn't said he's not intruding, hadn't said anything at all, actually. Just let the moment exist the way you let weather exist. Something you don't argue with. You just wait out. I poured myself a coffee I didn't want and sat down across from both of them and spent the next 40 minutes doing the thing I used to be best at in the world, disappearing into a room while watching every single thing that happened in it. Sebastian was good. I want to be fair about that, because underselling him would have gotten somebody hurt eventually, And I don't do sloppy work even in a life I didn't ask for. He asked about the company with exactly the right amount of interest. Enough to seem invested, not so much it read as prying. He complimented Elena's handling of some deal I hadn't heard of yet in a way that made it clear he'd actually followed her career instead of just her Instagram. He was warm to me too, genuinely, disarmingly warm, asked about my background in a tone that made the question feel like curiosity instead of the vetting it actually was. "Julian's from out of state," Elena said when I let the question sit a beat too long. "We don't really do the whole hometown and family tree thing at these functions." "Fair enough." Sebastian raised his hands. Easy, gracious. "I just like knowing who's taking care of people I care about." There it was, small, wrapped in warmth, delivered with a smile, but underneath it, unmistakable if you'd spent a career listening for exactly this frequency. A territory marker. People I care about. Present tense. Ongoing. A man reminding a room gently that his claim predated mine. I smiled back at him, easy, matching the warmth beat for beat, because that's rule one with a man like this. You never let him see the red land. "Good thing you don't have to worry about it then," I said. "I take my job seriously." "Job," he repeated, mild, tasting the word. "Fiancé," I said. "Whichever noun you prefer. I answer to both." Elena's phone rang before Sebastian could find an answer for that, and she excused herself to the far end of the balcony. And for about 90 seconds, it was just the two of us and 2 coffees going cold, and a view of the city that neither of us was actually looking at. "She's happier than I've seen her in years," Sebastian said, quiet now. The performance dialed back a notch, which I clocked as more dangerous, not less. A man showing you what he wants you to think is the real version of himself. "I hope you know what you have." I've spent a career watching men perform sincerity for a living, and there's always a seam if you know where to check for it. A half beat where the eyes go flat before the mouth catches up. Sebastian didn't have one. That was the actually alarming part. Whatever he was running, some part of him had stopped being able to tell it apart from the truth, and a liar who's fooled himself is a much harder read than one who hasn't. "I'm figuring it out in real time," I said, which was, for once, entirely true. "Don't take too long," he said, and smiled, and it didn't quite reach the warmth of his earlier ones. "Some things don't wait around for a man to figure himself out." His phone buzzed before I could answer that. He glanced at it, and something flickered across his face. Brief, gone fast. But I caught it, the same way I used to catch the half-second a man's eyes change right before he decided to lie to me. He silenced it without reading it, but not before I clocked the name on the screen. Marcus. I made a mental note and kept my face doing absolutely nothing about it. At this rate, I was going to need a second brain just for things I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. "For what it's worth," he added, quieter now, like the words cost him something to hand over. "I don't dislike you. I just don't think you understand yet what you've walked into." I raised one eyebrow while still retaining the warm practice smile mirroring him. "Oh, enlighten me." "I don't think I need to." He smiled again, easy, warmth reasserting itself like weather returning after a brief clear spell. "I think you'll figure it out on your own timeline, the way you seem to do everything. I just hope you figure it out before it costs her anything." "Duty calls," Sebastian said, standing. Easy again, warmth back on like a jacket. "Elena, lovely as always." "Julian." He shook my hand, and his grip was exactly the right amount of firm, exactly the right amount of friendly, calibrated down to the millimeter, by a man who'd clearly practiced being liked the way I'd once practiced not being remembered. "Take care of her." "Always," I said, and meant it in a register he wasn't equipped to hear. He left the way he'd arrived. Easy, golden, leaving a faint warmth in the room behind him, the way a stove leaves heat after you turn it off. Elena came back a minute later, phone call finished, and found me still standing on the balcony, staring at nothing in particular. "You were quiet," she said. "I'm a good listener." "You're a menace who's never once in his life just listened." She studied me a second, arms crossed, and that audit expression back in place. And then, surprising me, it softened. "He gets a lot of leeway from me. I know that. I've known him since I was 10. It's complicated. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. She looked out at the skyline, and for a second the armor slipped, just a fraction, just enough that I saw something underneath it that looked a lot like a woman standing in front of the one door in her whole life she'd never once let herself walk all the way through. He's the only person who ever wanted to be around me before he knew what I could do for anyone. I thought about the phone buzzing with Marcus's name, silence before it could be read in front of us. I thought about take care of her, said like a claim disguised as a courtesy. I thought about how easy it would be, in my old line of work, to walk a mark through exactly the kind of comfortable trust that made them stop checking the locks. I didn't say any of that. Not yet. I didn't have proof of anything, just instinct sharpened on 6 years of watching men exactly like him. And instinct, without proof, is just an accusation with better manners. I hope you're right about him, I said instead, and meant every word and hated, quietly, how much I hoped I was wrong to be worried. I know the gist of the story. I am not. He didn't stay away after that. Over the 2 weeks that followed, Sebastian Kane developed an extraordinary talent for having perfectly reasonable, entirely unplanned reasons to be exactly where Elena was. A charity board he'd apparently always meant to rejoin turned out to overlap with one of hers. A restaurant recommendation for an old client turned into a table 3 down from ours at a place I hadn't told anyone we were trying. Flowers arrived at her office twice. Not roses, never anything so obvious. Always some obscure, specific bloom that meant he'd remembered something personal enough to be unsettling. Signed only S, like a man confident enough in his own memory that he didn't need to spell out the rest. I watched every single one of it land. I watched Elena field it with the same practiced grace she fielded everything, never quite encouraging it and never quite shutting it down either. A woman who'd spent 18 years letting one particular kind of attention slide past her guard without asking herself too closely why. I said nothing about most of it. I tucked it away and told myself it could wait until I actually had something worth putting in front of her. It wasn't jealousy exactly, watching a man work 18 years of history like a key he still had a copy of. It was closer to the feeling I used to get watching a mark walk toward a deal I already knew was rigged against them. The specific, helpless frustration of seeing the shape of the con before the person inside it could.